He looked at her with genuine anxiety. Had she run out of arm sauce? Had she broken the arm-banging machine? Or was she just a very clever impersonator sent over to play the mother, while my true mummy tries to sober up the great statesman? My little boy, my darling little boy. She went into a paroxysm of silent weeping, working her shoulders up and down in a horrible manner and shaking the chair she sat in. There was nothing faked about this, he knew. She must have hit some real trouble along the line. It simply could not possibly be that she was weeping over him being stretched out in a hospital. Mucus slid from the tiny handkerchief and rested on her left cheekbone. Raymond closed his eyes for a moment, but he would not tell her what had happened, and felt a deep satisfaction that ultimately she would look in some mirror after she had left him and see this mess on her face. You are such a fraud, Mother. My God, I feel as well as I've ever felt. And I know that you've been all over this with whatever doctors there are out there on the telephone days ago. And now you're at the hospital because there's probably a sale at Bloomingdale's, or you're having a few radio actors blacklisted. And you make a production out of this like I was involved somehow in your life. His voice was bitter. His eyes were hard and dry. I have to be a fraud, she said, straightening her back and slipping several lengths of steel into her voice like whalebone into a corset. And I have to be the truth, too, and a shield and the courage for all the men I have ever known, yourself included, excepting my father. There is so much fraud in this world, and it needs to be turned away with fraud, the way steel is turned with steel, and the way a soft answer does not turneth away wrath. She had emerged, dripping with acid from her grief. Her face was a mass of ravaged colors and textures. Her hair was like an old lampshade fringe, and that glob of mucus still rested on her left cheekbone disgustingly. But she was herself again, and Raymond felt greatly relieved. How's Johnny? Fine. He'd be here, but that committee just finished working him over. Wait until that one is up for re-election. She sniffed noisily. So I told him he must stay there and stare them down. You have no use for him anyway, so I don't know why you bother to ask for him unless you feel guilt about something. I do feel guilt about something. About what? She leaned forward slightly because information is the prime increment of power. About Josie. Who's Josie? Josie Jordan, the senator's daughter. Oh, yes? Why do you feel guilt? His mother asked. Why? Because she thinks I deserted her. Raymond, why do you dramatize everything so? You were babies. I thought that since we're having our first meeting since I got the medal, since I got back from Korea, and I was in Korea for 2 years, I thought since you'd been pretending to be 2 other people, you know, honest and maternal and wistfully remorseful about how we had let our lives go along coldly and separately, and I thought that before we got any more honest and hated ourselves in the morning, that we might just pay Josie the respect of asking for her, you know, mentioning her name in passing the way they do about the dead. His voice was choked. His eyes were not dry. As though he had reminded her of what had triggered her in the first place, she began unexpectedly to weep. The lemon sunlight was reflected from the bright white blank wall outside the window at her back, and it lingered like St. Elmo's fire around the ridiculously small green hat she was wearing, a suspicion of a hat that had been assembled for $70 by an aesthetic leader for whom millinery signified the foundation stone of culture. What is the matter with you, Mother? She sobbed. You aren't crying about me. She sobbed and nodded. But I'm all right. I don't have a pain or an ache. I am absolutely fine. Oh, Raymond, what can I say to you? There has been so much to get done. We have so far to go. Johnny is going to lead the people of our country to the heights of their history. But I have to lead Johnny, Raymond. You know that. I know you know that. I have given my life and many, many significant things for all of this. My life. Simply that. And I can see that if I were to ransack my strength, remembered strength or future strength, I could not give more to this holy crusade than I have given. Now I have come face to face with my life where it has failed to cross your own. I can't tell you how a mother feels about that because you wouldn't understand. It made me weep for a little bit, that's all. What's that? Anybody and everybody recovers from tears. But I'm not sad, and I don't have regrets, because I know that what I did and what I do is for the greatest possible good for all of us." Raymond watched her, then made the small, despising gesture with his right hand, brushing her world out of his way as it came too close to him. "I don't understand one word of what you're saying," he told her. "I am saying this. Some terrible, terrible changes are going to come to this country." He flicked at the air with his hand violently, unaware of the movement, and he closed his eyes. "This country is going to go through a fire like it has never seen," she said in a low and earnest voice. "And I know what I am saying, because the signs are there to read, and I understand politics, which is the art of reading them. Time is going to roar and flash lightning in the streets, Raymond. Blood will gush behind the noise, and stones will fall, and fools and mockers will be brought down. The smugness and complacency of this country will be dragged through the blood and the noise in the streets until it becomes a country purged and purified back to original purity, which it once possessed so long ago when the founding fathers of this republic, the blessed, blessed fathers, brought it into life. And when that day comes, and we have been cleansed of the slime of oblivion and saved from the wasteful, wrong, sinful, criminal's selfish rottenness which Johnny, and only Johnny, is going to save us from, you will kneel beside me and thank me, and kiss my hands and my skirt, and give only me your love, as will the rest of the great people of this confused and blinded land." He put his hand over hers on the bed, then lifted it to his lips. Suddenly he felt himself being made soft with pity for both of them. He could not comprehend that his mother had any feelings, and it shocked him deeply. 2 days later, immediately after Raymond ate dinner in the room at Swarden with his leg still in a cast, Zilkov and the American operator came to the room with a package of playing cards, and subsequently gave him detailed instructions as to how he was to kill Holborn Gaines. The time they set was 3:45 the following morning. Gaines lived in an apartment house alone. The house maintained a self-service elevator after 1 a.m., when the nightman went off duty. There was no doorman. Zilkov had had a key made to fit the front door of the building and to Mr. Gaines' apartment, which was one of 4 on the 9th floor. The security man went over the pencil-sketched, then photostated floor plan of Gaines' small unit of 3 rooms and a bath, indicating where the bedroom was, and suggesting that Raymond strangle him, as it was the quietest and least complicated method, and, considering the close quarters in which he would have to work, the neatest. He added that Raymond must accept it as a rule, then and forever, that in the event that anyone, repeat anyone, ever discovered him on the scene of the assignment, this other person or persons must be killed. Was that clear? Zilkov may have reconsidered the risk he had decided to have Raymond run, for to make sure this condition was understood, he asked the American operator to repeat the admonition. As it worked out, Mr. Gaines was alone, but he was not asleep as he should have been to save Raymond considerable embarrassment. He was reading in bed, a 4-poster feather bed with 9 soft pillows all around behind him, and a shocking pink marabou bed jacket around his shoulders, chuckling over a few pounds of confidential reports from bureau chiefs in Washington, Rome, London, Madrid, and Moscow. The windows were closed tight, and, as in the office at all times, an electric heater was beaming up at him from the floor nearby. In July. As Raymond opened the door to the apartment, he knocked over the tall paper screen that Mr. Gaines kept in front of the opened door in the summertime. As it fell, it dislodged a picture hanging on the wall. It hit the floor with a crash. There could be no doubt that someone had come to call, and Raymond cursed himself as a blunderer because he knew well that Mr. Gaines would be tart about the visit in any event. "What the hell is that?" Mr. Gaines yelled shrilly. Raymond flushed with embarrassment. It was an entirely new feeling for him, and Mr. Gaines was the only living person who could have made him feel that way, because Mr. Gaines made him feel helpless, gawky, and grateful all at the same time. "It's me, Mr. Gaines," he said. "Raymond." "Raymond? Raymond?" Mr. Gaines was bewildered. "My assistant, Raymond Shaw?" Raymond appeared in the bedroom doorway at that moment. He was wearing a neat black suit, a dark gray shirt, a black tie, and black gloves. "Yes, sir," he said. I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Gaines." Mr. Gaines fingered the marabou bed jacket. "Don't get any ideas about this silly-looking bed jacket," he said irritably. "It was my wife's. It's the warmest thing I have. Perfect for reading in bed at night." "I didn't know you were married, Mr. Gaines." "She died nearly 6 years ago," Mr. Gaines said gruffly. Then he remembered, But what the hell are you doing here Mr. Gaines looked over at the alarm clock on the night table. "At 10 minutes to 4 in the morning." "Well, My God, Raymond, don't tell me you've come here to talk something over. I mean, surely you aren't going to pour out your heart with the details of some sordid love affair or anything like that." "No, sir. You see, Raymond, if you feel you must resign for any reason, a circumstance which I would regret, of course, surely you could leave a little note on my desk in the morning. I hate chattering like this. I thought I had explained to you that I loathe having to talk to people, Raymond." "Yes, sir. I'm sorry, Mr. Gaines." Mr. Gaines suddenly seemed to remember something significant. He lifted his left hand and pointed vaguely toward the door, looking, because of the fluffy feathers all around his white hair, something like the ancient Mrs. Santa R. Claus. "How did you get in here? When I close that door, it locks." "They gave me a key." "Who did?" "The people at the hospital." "What hospital? But why? Why did they give you a key?" Raymond had been moving slowly around the bed. At last he stood at Mr. Gaines' side, looking down at him sunk into the feather bed. He felt sheepish. "Raymond, answer me, my boy. Why are you here?" It was a relatively effortless job, because Mr. Gaines, being such an old man, did not have much strength, and Raymond, because of feelings of affection and gratitude for Mr. Gaines, did everything he could with his great strength to terminate his friend's life as quickly as possible. He thought of extinguishing the bedlight as he left, but turned it on again, remembering that he wouldn't be able to find his way out to the front door if he left the room in darkness. He walked 4 blocks west before taking a cab north on Lexington Avenue. He left it 3 blocks away from Swarden. He entered the sanitarium through the basement door, off the back areaway, showing his pass to the Soviet Army corporal in overalls who had taken him under the throat with the left forearm without speaking, and held until Raymond tapped his 3rd finger twice, then showed the pass. When Raymond got to his room, the American operator was waiting for him. "Still up?" Raymond said conversationally. "It's almost 4:30. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," the operator said. "Good night, Raymond. I'll send the nurses in to rig you up again." "Do I have to have those casts put on again?" "Those casts must stay on until you are discharged. How do you know who'll show up here as a visitor now that Mr. Gaines is dead?" The operator left the room. The nurses had Raymond undressed and bandaged in no time at all. Raymond, as it turned out, did have 2 more visitors before he left the hospital. Joe Downey, the managing editor of the Daily Press, stopped by after Mr. Gaines's funeral and offered Raymond the job of writing the column, which meant a $200 a week raise in pay and a net saving of $300 a week to the paper because, naturally, they didn't figure to start Raymond at the figure Mr. Gaines had finished at, and Mr. Gaines had been political columnist for the paper for 26 years. They also offered Raymond 50% of the syndication money, a net increase of 100% to the paper, because under the prior arrangement Mr. Gaines had kept it all, excepting the sales and distribution and promotion percentage. To the paper's owners, Mr. Downey allowed that Raymond was new and had such an unpleasant personality that it was better than 5 to 1 that no one would ever get around to telling him that he rated all the syndication money. It was fair. The reports from the bureau chiefs made up most of the columns, and the paper, not Raymond, had to pay the bureau chiefs. Besides, 1/2 of the syndication money came to $506 per week, which lifted Raymond's take-home pay by $706 per week. Mr. Downey estimated this as being a bargain because the paper would have the only Medal of Honor columnist in the business, which certainly should open the doors to information at the Pentagon, and he had that crazy stepfather who could scare people into talking to Raymond, and that mother who could get him in anywhere, even to share a double bed with the president if he felt like it, and he had had 5 solid years of learning his job from Holborn Gaines. $706 a week is a nice raise for a young fellow, particularly if he likes money. Actually, the increased income took the edge off the promotion for Raymond, but the way he would handle it, he figured the money would be the bank's problem, not his. Raymond was distraught over the murder. He had had great regard for the old man, and a fondness that was unusual, inasmuch as he felt fondness for only two other people in the world, Marco and Josie, and Josie should not be included in the category because the feeling for her was vastly different again. He just could not get it through his head that anyone would want to murder Mr. Gaines. He had been a kind and gentle and helpless old man, and how could anyone do such a thing? Mr. Downey expressed the police opinion that it must have been some mentally unstable political crank. Holly was one of the oldest friends I had left, Mr. Downey said sadly, mourning for himself. Is the paper going to post a reward? Mr. Downey rubbed his chin. I guess we should at that. We certainly should. Can charge it to promotion if we ever have to pay it. I want to pledge $5,000 of that reward, Raymond said hotly. You don't need to do that, Raymond. Well, I want to, goddammit. Well, okay. You pledge 5 and we'll pledge 10, although the board will have to okay it, of course. And I'll call Center Street soon as I get back to the office so they can send out paper on it. By God, we'll pay for a general alarm, too, the dirty bastard. Downey was doubly upset because he hated to spend the paper's money, and he knew damned well that Holly Gaines, wherever he was, wouldn't approve of a goddamn Boy Scout grandstand play like that, but what the hell? There were certain things you pretended you had to do. Marco came in to see Raymond the same afternoon. Jesus, you look like hell, Raymond said from under his head bandage and traction equipment. What happened? Marco looked worse than that. The old sayings are the best, and Marco looked like death warmed over. What do you mean, what happened, he said. I'm not in a hospital bed, am I? I just mean I never saw you look so lousy. Well, thanks. What happened? Marco ran his hand across his face. I can't sleep. Can't you get some pills? Raymond said tentatively. Having a narcotics addict for a mother, he had developed an aversion to drugs. Also, it was difficult for him to understand any kind of a sleeping problem, since he himself could have fallen asleep hanging by one ankle in a high wind. It's not so much that I can't sleep, it's more that I'd rather not sleep. I'm walking around punchy because I'm scared. I keep having the same nightmare. Raymond, lying flat on his back, made the flicking gesture with his right hand. Is it a nightmare about a Soviet general and a lot of Chinese and me and the guys who were on the patrol? Marco came out of the chair like a tiger. He stood over Raymond, gripping the cloth of his pajama jacket in both fists, staring down at him with wild eyes. How did you know that? How did you know that? His voice went up and up like eccentric stairs in front of a hilltop summer beach house. Take your hands off me! With that sentence, Raymond's voice fell back into his horrid, drawling manner, into his repulsive, inciting, objectionable voice that he used to keep the rest of the world on the other side of the moat surrounding the castle where he had always lain under the spell of the wicked witch. It was curdlingly unfriendly, and so actively repellent that it drove Marco backward into the chair, which was a good thing because Marco had gone into a sick yellow ivory color. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes shone with an ever-so-slight sheen of insanity as he had reached out to take the shape of his oppression into the muscles of his fingers and hands, and punish it for what it had been doing to his dignity, which is man's own inner image of himself. I'm sorry, Raymond. Raymond became Marco's friend again, instantly, as though there had been no lapse. Please tell me how you knew about my nightmare, Raymond. Well, you see, I didn't really. I mean, it's just that Melvin, you know, Al Melvin, the corporal on the patrol, he wrote me a long letter about it a week ago. I was naturally surprised to hear from him because, well, as you know, I was never much one for fraternizing, but he said in the letter that I was the only one he knew how to reach. He sent the letter to Johnny because everybody certainly knows how to reach him, because he had to tell somebody in the patrol about this nightmare, or he was afraid he would lose his mind, and please tell me about the nightmare, Raymond. Well, he dreams that the patrol is all sitting together. He says he dreams about a lot of Soviet officers and some Chinese brass and us being on the patrol. What is such a nightmare about that? Where's the letter? Do you have the letter? Well, no. I mean, I never keep letters. Is that all he wrote? Is that all about the nightmare? Yeah. It just stops right there? I guess so. Man. Is it like your nightmare? Yeah. As a matter of fact, mine is a lot like that. You guys ought to get together. Right away. You don't know what this means to me. I just can't explain to you what this means to me, Raymond. Well, you can't see him right away, though, Ben. He lives in Wainwright, Alaska. Alaska? Alaska? Yes. Jesus, Wainwright, Alaska, you have to be kidding. No, I wish I was, Ben. I'm not. But so what? What's the difference? What's the difference? I told you I can't sleep. You told me I look like hell. Well, I feel like hell, and I'm shaken all to pieces, and I think sometimes I should kill myself because I'm afraid of going insane. And then you tell me, like you were talking about the weather, that another man who was on the patrol is having the same delusions that I was afraid were driving me crazy. And you tell me he lives in some place called Wainwright, Alaska, where I can't sit down and talk to him and find out if he's cracking up like I am and how we can help each other, and you say, what's the difference? Marco began to laugh hysterically. Then he put his face forward into his large hands and wept into them, squeezing tightly at his cheekbones, his heavy shoulders moving grotesquely and causing the 4 rows of his decorations to jump up and down. He made such tearing sounds that the 2 Soviet Army nurses on the floor came running in. After 6 or 7 minutes of Marco's reckless, unrelieved, and shocking sobbing, at which Raymond stared helplessly, they hit him with a hypo to calm him down and get him the hell out of there. All in all, Raymond had had a most ironic hospital stay. What with a visit from the wife of America's most gallant and noisy anti-communist to a hospital operated by the Soviet secret police, what with a U.S. Army intelligence officer breaking down and embarrassing the staff of the same place, what with contributing $5,000 to a reward for his own capture, and what with learning that 2 grown men were capable of behaving like children over a perfectly harmless, if repetitious, dream. Chapter 10. Johnny had become chairman of the Committee on Federal Operations and chairman of its permanent subcommittee on investigations, with a budget of $200,000 a year and an inculcating staff of investigators. He grew sly in the way he worked that staff. He would sidle up to a fellow senator or another member of the government placed as high and mention the name and habits of some young lady for whom the senator might be paying the necessities, or perhaps an abortion here, or a folly of youth police record there. It worked wonders. He had only to drop this kind of talk upon 5 or 6 of them, and at once they became his missionaries to intimidate others who might seek to block his ways in government. There were a few groups and individuals who were able to find the courage to assail him. One of the most astute political analysts of the national scene wrote, "Isolanism has developed a process for compounding a lie, then squaring it, which is a modern miracle of dishonesty far exceeding the claims of filter cigarettes. Isolin's lies seem to have atomic motors within them, tiny reactors of such power and such complexity as to confound and baffle all with direct and even slightly honest turns of mind. He has bellowed out so many accusations about so many different people, and for all the public knows, these names he brandishes may have been attached to people of entirely questionable existence, that no one can keep the records of these horrendous charges straight. Isolin is a man who shall forever stand guard at the door of the mind to protect the people of this great nation from facts." The American Association of Scientists asked that this statement be published. Senator Isolin puts the finishing touches on his sabotage of the morale of American scientists to the enormous net gain of those who work against the interests of the United States. Johnny was doing great. From a semi-hangdog country governor, Raymond's mother said, utterly unknown outside domestic politics on a state level in 1956, he had transformed himself into a global figure in 1957. He had a lot going for him beyond Raymond's mother. His very looks, that meaty nose, the nearly total absence of forehead, the perpetual unshavenness, the piggish eyes, red from being dipped in bourbon, the sickeningly monotonous voice, whining and grating, all of it together made Johnny one of the greatest demagogues in American history, even if, as Raymond's mother often said to friends, he was essentially a light-hearted and unserious one. Nonetheless, her Johnny had become the only American in the country's history of political villains, studying folk song and story, to inspire concomitant fear and hatred in foreigners resident in their native countries. He blew his nose in the Constitution, he thumbed his nose at the party system or any other version of governmental chain of command. He personally charted the zigs and zags of American foreign policy at a time when the American policy was a monstrously heavy weight upon world history. To the people of Iceland, Peru, France, and Pitcairn Island, the label of Icelandism stood for anything and everything that was dirty, backward, ignorant, repressive, offensive, anti-progressive, or rotten, and all of those adjectives must ultimately be seen as sincere tributes to any demagogue of any country on any planet. After Raymond's mother had written the scriptures and set the tone of the sermons Johnny was to make along the line to glory, she left him bellowing and pointing his finger while she organized for nearly 15 months the cells of the Iceland national organization she called the Loyal American Underground. This organization enrolled, during that first period of her work, 2,300,000 members, all militantly for Johnny and what he stood for, and most deeply grateful for his wanting to give our friends a place from which they may partake of a sense of history through adventure and real participation in the cause of fanatic good government, cleansed of the stain of communism. Raymond's mother and her husband held their mighty political analysis and strategy planning sessions at their place, which was out toward Georgetown. They would talk and drink bourbon and ginger ale, and Johnny would fool around with his scrapbook. He always had it in his mind that cold winter nights would be the best time to paste up the bundles of clippings about his work into individual books, with the intent of someday providing the vast resources for a John Yerkes Iceland Memorial Library. The analyses of the day's or the week's battles were always informal and usually productive of really constructive action for the immediate future. "Han," Raymond's mother said, "aren't there times when you're up there at the committee table when you have to go to the John?" "Of course. What do you think I'm made of, blotting paper or something?" "Well, what do you do about it?" "Do? I get up and I go." "See, that's exactly what I mean. Now, tomorrow, when you have to go, I want you to try it my way and see what happens, will you?" He grinned horribly. "Right up there in front of all those TV cameras?" "Never mind. Tomorrow, when you have to go, I want you to throw yourself into a rage, making sure you are on camera. Wait for a tight shot if you can. And bang on the desk and scream for the chairman and yell, 'Point of order, point of order.' Then stand up and say you will not put up with this farce, and that you will not dignify it with your presence for one moment longer." "Why do I do that?" "You have to start making the right kind of exits for yourself, Johnny, so that the American people will know that you have left so they can sit nervously and wait for you to come back." "Gee, hon, that's a hell of an idea." "Oh, say, I like that idea." She threw him a kiss. "What an innocent you are," she said, smiling at him dotingly. "Sometimes I don't think you give a damn what you're talking about or who you're talking about." "Well, why the hell should I?" "You're right, of course." "You're damned right I'm right." "What the hell, hon? This is a business with me. Suppose we were lawyers, I often say to myself. I mean actual practicing lawyers. I'd be the trial lawyer working out in front, rigging the juries and feeding the stuff to the newspaper boys, and you'd be the brief man back in the law library who has the research job of writing up the case." He finished the highball in his hand and gave the empty glass to his wife. She got up to make him another drink and said, "Oh, I agree with that, honey, but just the same, I wish you would try a little bit more to feel the sacredness of your own mission." "The hell with that. What's with you tonight, baby? I'm like a doctor in a way. Am I supposed to die with every patient I lose? Life's too short." He accepted the highball. "Thank you, honey." "You're welcome, sweetheart. What is this stuff, Applejack?" "Applejack? It's 12-year-old bourbon." "That's funny. It tastes like Applejack." "Maybe it's the ginger ale." "The ginger ale? I always drink my bourbon with ginger ale. How could it taste like Applejack because of the ginger ale? It never tasted like Applejack before." "I can't understand it," she said. "Ah, what's the difference? I happen to like Applejack." "You're so sweet it isn't even funny." "Not so sweet as you." "Johnny, have you noticed that some of the newspaper idiots are getting a little nasty with their typewriters?" "Don't pay any attention." He waved a careless hand. "It's a business with them, just like our business. You start getting sensitive and you just confuse everybody. The boys who are assigned to cover me may call themselves the Goon Squad, but I don't notice that any of them have ever asked to be transferred. It's a game with them. They spend their time trying to catch me in lies, then printing that I said a lie. They like me. They try to knife me, but they like me. I try to knife them, but we drink together and we're friends. What the hell, hon? All we're trying to do is get a day's work done. Take it from me, never get sensitive." "Johnny, baby." "Yes, hon?" "Do me a favor, and tomorrow at the lunch break, please make it a point to go into that Senate barber shop for a shave." You can stand 2 shaves a day. I swear to God, sometimes I think you can grow a beard in 20 minutes. You look like a badger in a Disney cartoon on that TV screen. Don't worry about it, hon. I have my own ways, and I look my own way, but I'm very goddamned American, and they all know it out there. Just the same, hon, will you promise to get a shave tomorrow at the lunch break? Certainly. Why not? Give me another drink. I got a big day coming up tomorrow. John Yerkes Iselin was re-elected to his second 6-year term on November 4th, 1958, by the biggest plurality in the history of elections in his state. 236 fistfights went unreported the following evening in the pubs, cafes, bodegas, cantinas, trattorias, and sundry brasseries of Western Europe between the glum American residents and the outraged, consternated natives of the larger cities. Early one Monday morning in his office at the Daily Press, for he had taken to arriving at work at 7:30 rather than at 10 o'clock, now that he was the department head, just as had Mr. Gaines before him, Raymond looked up and saw, with no little irritation at the interruption, the figure of Chun Jin standing in the doorway. Raymond did not remember ever having seen him before. The man was slight and dark, with alert, liquid eyes, and a most intelligent expression. He stared with wistful hopefulness mixed with ascending regard, but these subtleties did not transport Raymond to remembering the man. "Yes," he drawled in his calculatedly horrid way. "I am Chun Jin, Mr. Shaw, sir. I was interpreter attached to Charlie Company, 52nd Regiment." Raymond pointed his outstretched finger right at Chun Jin's nose. "You were interpreter for the patrol," he said. "Yes, sir, Mr. Shaw." Other men might have allowed their camaraderie to foam over in the warming glow of the good old days, but Raymond said, "What do you want?" Chun Jin blinked. "I mean to say, what are you doing here?" Raymond said, not backing away from his bluntness, but attempting to cope with this apparent stupidity through clearer syntax. "Your father did not say to you?" "My father? Senator Iselin, I write to—" "Senator Iselin is not my father. Repeat, he is not my father. If you learn nothing else on your visit to this country, memorize that fact. I write to Senator Iselin. I tell him how I interpret your outfit. I tell him I want to come to America. He get me visa. Now I need job." "A job?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Shaw. My dear fellow, we don't use interpreters here. We all speak the same language. I am tailor and mender. I am cook. I am driver of car. I am cleaner and scrubber. I fix anything. I take message. I sleep at house of my cousin and not eat much food. I ask for job with you because you are great man who saved my life. I need for pay only $10 a week." $10? For all that? "Yes, sir, Mr. Shaw." "Well, look here, Chun Jin, I couldn't pay you only $10 a week." "Yes, sir, only $10 a week." "I can use a valet. I would like having a cook, I think. A good cook, I mean, and I dislike washing dishes. I had been thinking about getting a car, but the parking thing sort of has me stopped. I go to Washington twice a week, and there's no reason why I shouldn't have the money the airlines are getting from this newspaper for those trips, and I'd rather not fly that crowded corridor anyway. I would prefer it if you didn't sleep in, as a matter of fact, but I'm sorry, $10 a week just isn't enough money." Raymond said that flatly, as though it were he who had applied for the job and was turning it down for good and sufficient reasons. "I work for 15, sir." "How can you live on $15 a week in New York?" "I live with the cousins, sir." "How much do the cousins earn?" "I do not know, sir." "Well, I'm sorry, Chun Jin, but it's out of the question." Raymond, who had still not greeted his old wartime buddy, turned away to return to his work. From his expression, he had dismissed the conversation, and he was anxious to return to the bureau reports and to some very helpful information his mother had managed to send along to him. "Is not good for you to pay less, Mr. Shaw?" Raymond turned slowly, forcing his attention back to the Korean and realizing impatiently that he had not made it clear that the meeting was over. "Perhaps I should have clarified my position in the matter as follows," Raymond said frostily. "It strikes me that there is something basically dishonest about an arrangement by which a man insists upon working for less money than he can possibly live on." "You think I steal, Mr. Shaw?" Raymond flushed. I had not considered any specific category of such theoretical dishonesty. "I live on $2 a week in Mokpo. I think $10 many times better." "How long have you been here?" Chun Jin looked at his watch. 2 hours? I mean in New York. 2 hours? All right. I will instruct the bank to pay you a salary of $25 a week. Thank you, Mr. Shaw, sir. I will supply the uniforms. Yes, sir. Raymond leaned over the desk and wrote the bank's address on a slip of paper, adding Mr. Rotenberg's name. Go to this address, my bank. Ask for this man. I'll call him. He'll give you the key to my place and some instructions for stocking food. He'll tell you where to buy it. We don't use money. Please have dinner ready to serve at 7:15 next Monday. I'll be in Washington for the weekend, where I may be reached at the Willard Hotel. I'm thinking in terms of roast veal, a boned rump of veal with green beans, no potato, please. Chunjin, never serve me a potato. No, sir, Mr. Shaw. Some canned, not fresh, spinach, pan gravy, I think, some stewed fruit, and 2 cups of hot black coffee. Yes, sir, Mr. Shaw, just like in United States Army. Jesus, I hope not, Raymond said. Chapter 11. On April 15th, 1959, the very same day on which Chunjin got his job with Raymond on transfer from the Soviet Army, another military transfer occurred. Major Marco was placed on indefinite sick leave and detached from duty. Marco had undergone 2 series of psychiatric treatments at Army hospitals. As the recurring nightmare had grown more vivid, the pathological fatigue had gotten more severe. No therapy had been successful. Marco had weighed 208 pounds when he had come into New York from Korea. At the time he went on indefinite sick leave, he weighed in at 163, and he looked a little nuts. Every nerve end in his body had grown a small, ticklish mustache, and they sidled along under his skin like eager touts screaming on tiptoe. He had the illusion that he could see and hear everything at once, and had lost all of his ability to edit either sight or sound. Sound particularly detonated his reflexes. He tried desperately not to listen when people talked, because an open A sound repeated several times within a sentence could make him weep uncontrollably. He didn't know why. So he concentrated on remembering the cause when he could, so that he would not listen so attentively, but it didn't work. It was an A sound that must have been somewhat like a sound he had heard many, many years before in utter peace and safety, which, through its loss or through his indifference to it over the years, could now cause him to weep bitterly. If he heard the sound occur once, he quickly hummed La Seine to push the A sound off to the side. His hand tremors were pronounced when his arm was extended unsupported. Sometimes his teeth would chatter as though he had entered a chill. Once in a while, after 4 or 5 unrelieved nights of nightmare, he developed a bad facial tic, and it wasn't pretty. Marco was being rubbed into sand by the grinding stones of 2 fealties. He was being slowly rubbed away by 2 faiths he lived by, far beyond his control. The first, his degree of holy reverence for the Medal of Honor, one of the most positive prejudices of his life, because his life principally was the Army. And the second was the abnormal degree of his friendship for Raymond Shaw, which had been placed upon his mind as coffee will leave a stain upon a fresh, snowy tablecloth by the deepest psychological conditioning. When Marco completed, for the want of any other word, the 2nd course of treatment, and was ordered to rest, they knew he was through, and he knew they knew it. He headed for New York to talk to Raymond. He had never been able to tell the doctors the part of the dream where Raymond killed Mavole and Lembeck on a continuous performance basis, and he had not allowed himself to mention every phase of the 4 variations on the drill that had been used to win Raymond the Medal of Honor. He had written to Al Melvin, and between them, he and Melvin had spent over $300 talking to each other on the long-distance telephone, and it had brought considerable relief to each to know that the other was suffering as deeply from the same malady, but it did not stop the nightmares. Marco knew that he must talk to Raymond. He must, absolutely must. He knew that if he did not talk to Raymond about most of the details in his dreams, he would die from them. Ironically, as Marco was riding one train to New York, Raymond was riding another to Washington. Marco sat like a stone in the train chair, riding sideways in the club car. The car was about half filled. Almost all of the seats were occupied at one end, Marco's end, by businessmen, or what seemed to be businessmen, but were actually an abortionist, an orchestra leader, a low church clergyman, an astrologer, a Boy Scout executive, a horticulturalist, and a cinematographer. because no matter how much they would like the world to think so, the planet is not populated entirely by businessmen, no matter how banal the quality of conversation everywhere has become. Some women were present. Their dresses gave the car the only embarrassing touch of color, excepting the garish decorations on the upper left side of Marco's blouse. Marco had a rye old-fashioned placed on the round metal stand in front of him, but he hadn't tasted it. He kept wishing he had ordered beer not to taste, and he was careful not to look at anybody, because he had stopped doing that several weeks before. He sweated continuously. His face had very little color. His palms drenched his trousers at the tops of his knees. He was battling to make a decision as to whether he wanted to smoke a cigar or not. His eyes burned. He felt an agony of weariness. His stomach hurt. He concentrated for an instant on not clenching his teeth, but he could not retain the thought. His jaws were tired, and some doctor had told him that he would grind the dentine off his molars if he didn't concentrate on not clenching his jaws. He turned his body slightly, but not his head, toward the person sitting beside him, a woman. "Do you mind cigar smoke?" he mumbled. "Not at all," she murmured. He turned away from her, but made no move to find a cigar. "Go ahead," she said. "As a matter of fact, I wish you'd smoke 2 cigars at the same time." "You must really like cigar smoke." "Not especially, but I think 2 cigars going at the same time would look awfully amusing." He turned his body again toward the woman sitting beside him. He lifted his eyes slowly, hesitantly, beyond the long, scarlet-tipped fingers that repose in her lap, past a shining silver belt-buckle, shaped as Quetzalcoatl, an urbane feathered serpent, past up-tilted, high-setting, pronounced breasts that stared back at him eyelessly through dark blue wool, past the high neckline and the discreet seed pearls around a long throat of white Carrara marble, to a mouth whose shape he had yearned to see in living flesh, since he had seen its counterpart within a photograph he had found in a German magazine 23 years before, rolled up in his father's effects in the trunk of a command car. In abstract, it was a sexual object. It was a witty mouth. It looked insatiable. It told him about lust which had been lost far back in mythology, lust which could endow its tasters with eternal serenity, and it was the mouth of many varieties of varying kinds of woman. He regretted having to leave off his concentration on the sight of it. With difficulty he moved his eyes upward to the questing horn of a most passionate nose, a large, formed, aquiline, and Semitic nose, the nose of a seeker and a finder of glories, and it made him remember that every Moslem who attains heaven is allotted 72 women who must look exactly like this between the eyes and the mouth. And he thought across the vast, vast distance of the Huanacauri rock of Incan puberty to the words of the black, black, black song that keened, "If she on earth no more I see, my life will quickly fade away." Then at last his eyes came to the level of the eyes of a Tuareg woman, and he rushed past a random questioning as to whether the Berlitz schools taught temajeg. And he thought of the god of love, who was called bodiless by the Hindus, because he was consumed by the fire of Siva's eyes. Then he closed his own eyes and tried to help himself, to stop himself, to sweet God in heaven he could not. He began to weep. He stumbled to his feet. The passengers across the aisle stared at him hostilely. He knocked his drink over and the metal stand over. He turned blindly and noisily to the left, unable to stop weeping, and made it from behind the wet opaqueness to the train door in the vestibule. He stood alone in the vestibule and put his head against the window and waited for time to pass, feeling confident that it would pass, when his motor would run down and the sobbing would slowly subside. Trying to analyze what had happened, as though to fill his mind, he was forced into the conclusion that the woman must have looked the way that Open A sounded to him, an open, effortless, problemless, safe, and blessed look. What color had her hair been, he wondered as he wept. He concentrated upon the words by which angels had been known, Yaztas, Fravashi, and Ameshaspentas, Seraphim and Cherubim, Hayot, Ophanim, Arelim, and Harut and Marut, who had said, "We are only a temptation, be not then an unbeliever." He concentrated upon the words by which angels had been known, Yaztas, Fravashi, and Ameshaspentas, Seraphim and Cherubim, Hayot, Ophanim, Arelim, and Harut and Marut, who had said, We are only a temptation. Be not then an unbeliever. He decided that the woman could only be one of the Fravashi, that army of angels that has existed in heaven before the birth of man, that protects him during his life, and is united to his soul at death. He sobbed while he conjectured about the color of her hair. At last he was permitted to stop weeping. He leaned against the train wall in exhaustion, riding backward. He took a handkerchief slowly from his trousers pocket, and with an effort of strength which he could not replenish with sleep, slowly dried his face, then blew his nose. He thought only fleetingly that he could not go back into that club car again, but that there would be plenty of other seats in the other direction, toward the rear of the train. When he got to New York, he decided he would pull on a pair of gray slacks and a red woolen shirt, and he'd sit all day on the rim of the map of the United States behind Raymond's big window, looking out at the Hudson River and that state, whatever its name was, on the other shore, and think about the states beyond that state and drink beer. When he turned to find another seat in another car, she was standing there. Her hair was the color of birch bark, prematurely white, and he stared at her as though her thyroid were showing its excessive activity and her hyper-eroticism. She stood smoking a new cigarette, leaning back, riding forward, and looking out of the window. "Maryland is a beautiful state," she said. "This is Delaware." "I know. I was one of the original Chinese workmen who laid track on this stretch, but nonetheless, Maryland is a beautiful state. So is Ohio, for that matter." "I guess so. Columbus is a tremendous football town. You in the railroad business?" He felt dizzy. He wanted to keep talking. "Not any more," she told him. "However, if you will permit me to point it out, when you ask someone that, you really should say, 'Are you in the railroad line?'" "Where is your home?" "I've been in the Army all my life," Marco said. "We keep moving. I was born in New Hampshire. I went to a girls' camp once, on Lake Francis." "Well, that's away north. What's your name?" "Eugenie." "Pardon? No kidding. I really mean it, and with that crazy French pronunciation." "It's pretty. Thank you." "Your friends call you Jenny?" "Not yet, they haven't. I think it's a nice name." "You may call me Jenny." "But what do your friends call you?" "Rosie." "Why?" "My full name, the first name, is Eugenie Rose. I always favored Rosie of the two names because it smells like brown soap and beer. It's the kind of a name that is always worn by the barmaid who always gets whacked across the behind by draymen. My father used to say it was a portly kind of a name, and with me being 5'9", he always figured I had a better chance of turning out portly than fragile, which is really and truly the way a girl using the name of Eugenie would have to be. Still, when I asked you your name, you said Eugenie. It is quite possible that I was feeling more or less fragile at that instant. I never could figure out what more or less meant. Nobody can. Are you Arabic? No. He held out his hand to be taken in formal greeting. My name is Ben. It's really Bennett. I was named after Arnold Bennett. The writer? No, a lieutenant colonel. He was my father's commanding officer at the time. What's your last name? Marco. Major Marco, are you Arabic? No, but no kidding, I was sure you were Arabic. I would have placed your daddy's tents within 12 miles of the Hogar Range in the central Sahara. There's a town called Jeannette in there, and a tiny little place with a very rude name that I couldn't possibly repeat even if you had a doctorate in geography. When the sun goes down and the rocks, which have been heated so tremendously all day, are chilled suddenly by the night, which comes across the desert like flung cold black stout, it makes a salvo like 100 rifles going off in rapid fire. The wind is called the Khamsin, and after a flood throws a lot of power down a mountainside, the desert is reborn and millions of white and yellow flowers come to bloom all across the empty desolation. The trees, when there are trees, have roots 100 feet long. There are catfish in the water holes. Think of that. Did you know that? Sure. Some of them run 10, 12 inches. Everywhere else in the Arab world, the woman is a beast of burden. Among the Tuareg, the woman is queen, and the Hogar are the purest of the Tuareg. They have a ceremony called Achal, a sort of court of love where the woman reigns with her beauty, her wit, or the quality of her blood. They have enormous chivalry, the Tuareg. If a man wants to say, "I love," he will say, "I am dying of love." I have dreamed many times of a woman I have never seen and will never see because she died in 1395, and to this day the Tuareg recall her in their poetry, in their ahals, telling of her beauty, intelligence, and her wit. Her name was Dassin Olt Yema, and her great life was deeply punctuated by widely known love affairs with the great warriors of her time. I thought you were she. For just an instant, back there in that car a little while ago, I thought you were she." His voice had gotten more and more rapid, and his eyes were feverish. She had held his hand tightly in both of hers as he had spoken, ever since he had introduced himself. They stared at each other. "Thank you," she said. "You became one of my best and bravest thoughts," he told her. "I thank you." The taut band around his head had loosened. "Are you married?" "No. You?" "No. What's your last name?" "Cheney. I'm a production assistant for a man named Justin who had 2 hits last season. I live on 54th Street, a few doors from the Museum of Modern Art, of which I am a Tea Privileges member, no cream. I live at 53 West 54th Street, 3B. Can you remember that?" "Yes." "Eldorado 92632. Can you remember that?" "Yes." "You look so tired." "Apartment 3B. Are you stationed in New York? Is stationed the right word?" 53 West 54th Street. "I'm not exactly stationed in New York. I have been stationed in Washington, but I got sick, and I have a long leave now, and I'm going to spend it in New York." "Eldorado 92632. I stay with a friend of mine, a newspaperman. We were in Korea together." Marco ran a wet hand across his face and began to hum La Seine. He had found the source of the sound of the open A. It was far inside this girl, and it was in the sound of the name Dassin Olt Yama. He couldn't get the back of his hand away from his mouth. He had had to shut his eyes. He was so tired. He was so tired. She took his hand gently away from his mouth. "Let's sit down," she said. "I want you to put your head on my shoulder." The train lurched and he almost fell, but she caught and held him. Then she led the way into the other car where there were plenty of seats. Raymond's apartment was on the extreme west coast of the island, where firemen had heavy bags under their eyes from piling out 4 and 5 times a night to push sirens to brownstone houses, where nobody had any time to do anything about too many bone-weary Puerto Ricans living in one room. It was a strip of city too dishonest to admit it was a slum, or rather, in all the vastness of the 5 boroughs of Metropolis, there was a strip of city, very tiny, which was not a slum. And this was the thin strip that was photographed and its pictures sent out across the world, until all the world and the minuscule few who lived in that sliver of city thought that was New York, and neither knew or cared about the remainder of the 600 square miles of flesh and brick. Here was the ripe slum of the West Side, where the city had turned so bad that at last 13 square blocks of it had had to be torn down before the rats carried off the babies. New York, New York, it's a wonderful town. The west side of the island was rich in facades, not unlike the possibilities of a fairy princess with syphilis. Central Park West was all front and faced a glorious park, betrayed only now and then by bands of chattering faggots auctioning bodies, and by an excessive population of emotion-caparisoned people in the somewhat temporary-looking sanitariums on so many of its side streets. Columbus and Amsterdam avenues were the streets of the drunks, where the murders were done in the darkest morning hours, where there were an excessive number of saloons and hardware stores. They were connected by trains of brownstone houses whose fronts were riotously colored, morning and evening and all day on Sunday, by bursts and bouquets of Puerto Ricans, and beyond Amsterdam was Broadway, the bawling flash street, the fleshy, pig-eyed part of the city that wore lesions of neon and incandescent scabs, pustules of lights and color in suggestively luetic lycopods, illuminating littered streets, filth-clogged streets that could never be cleansed because when 1,000 hands cleaned, 1,000,000 hands threw dirt upon the streets again. Broadway was patrolled by strange-looking pedestrians, people who had grabbed the wrong face in the dark when someone had shouted fire, and were now out roaming the streets desperate to find their own. For city block after city block on Broadway, it seemed that only food was sold. Beyond that was West End Avenue, a misplaced street, bitter on its own memories, lost and bewildered, seeking some Shaker Heights, desperately genteel behind an apron of shabby bricks. Here was the limbo of the lower middle class, where God the Father, in the form of sunlight, never showed his face. Raymond lived beyond that, on Riverside Drive, another front street of large, grand apartments that had become cabbage-sour furnished rooms, which faced the river and an excessive amount of squalor on the Jersey shore. Altogether, the avenues and streets proved by their decay that the time of the city was long past, if it had ever existed, and the tall buildings, end upon end upon end, were so many extended fingers beckoning the bomb. Marco paid the cab off in front of Raymond's building. On an April day, the city was colder than Labrador, and the wind had found teeth which tore at his face. Marco felt like a giant. He had slept 3 hours on the train without dreaming, and he had awakened in Rosie Cheney's arms. He would have a very delicious therapy to tell those Pate doctors about when this was all over. When it was all over but the sobbing. Big joke. All over but the sobbing, he thought, giving the driver a quarter tip. He got into the elevator feeling confident that behind Raymond's mustard-colored eyes there was an almost human understanding. Not that Raymond was any monotreme, but he seemed pretty much like a Martian sometimes. 53 West 54th, apartment 3B. He just wanted to hear Raymond tell how he had gotten the Medal of Honor. He just wanted to talk about blackboards and pointers and Chinese, and that crude animated cartoon with the blue spot. Eldorado 92632. He wouldn't talk to Raymond about the murders and the nightmares. Rosie, Eugenie Rose, my wild Arab nose. Oh, what a gorgeous nose. Cyrano, Act 1, Scene 1. Pedantic. Does not Aristophanes mention a mythologic monster called Hippocampalelephantocamulus? That projection room and the American voice on the soundtrack and the flat, empty half-film cans like pie plates used as ashtrays. Suddenly, he could taste the yak dung cigarettes again, and it was marvelous. If he could only remember the name of that brand, he thought, but somehow he never could. He thought about the movement of the many red dots on the screen, then of Raymond, symbolized by the blue dot, and the canned voice telling them that they were seeing the battle action in which Raymond had been willing to sacrifice his life again and again to save them all. The elevator operator indicated the doorway directly across the hall. Marco rang the bell while the operator waited. Chun-Jin answered the door. He stood clearly under good light, wearing black trousers, a white shirt, a black bow tie, and a white jacket, looking blankly at Marco, waiting for an inquiry, not having time to recognize the major, and most certainly not expecting him. To Marco, he was a djinn who had stepped into flesh out of that torment which was giving him lysophobia. Not more than 4/5 of a second passed before Marco hit Chun-Jin high in the chest, having thrown the desperate punch for the center of the man's face, but the Korean had stepped backward reflexively and had saved himself partially from the unexpectedness of Marco's assault. Because he had not thought of himself as being on duty while Raymond was out of the city, Chun-Jin was unarmed. However, he was a trained agent and a good one. He held the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Soviet security forces, and he had been assigned to Raymond on a crash basis. He had recognized Marco too late. He was entirely current on Marco's dossier because the major was Raymond's only friend. The elevator operator, a sturdy 28-year-old, watched the Korean carried backward and the door flung inward to bang against the pink plaster wall. He rushed in fast behind Marco and tried to pull him back. Marco held Chun-Jin off with his left hand and cooled the elevator man with his right. Chun-Jin took that left arm and drew Marco into a prime judo catch and threw him high across the room so he could get at Marco's neck, coming down on it hard enough to break it in the follow-up. But Marco rolled and kept rolling when he hit the floor and slipped locks on hard when Chun-Jin came down, missing him. They were both black belts, which is the highest judo rank there is, this side of a Dan. Marco had weight on his man, but Marco was in a run-down condition. However, he had been lifted into a murderous exhilaration, and was filled to his hairline with adrenaline, because he had at last been permitted to take those nightmares and one of the people in them into the fingers of his hands, to beat and to torture until he found out why they had happened, and where they had happened, and how they could be made to stop. What worked the best was the 29 extra pounds of weight, and as 4 neighbors watched with studious curiosity from the safer side of the door sill, he broke Chun-Jin's forearm. The Korean almost took the side of his face and his neck off, not losing a beat of his rhythm during the fracture, and appalling Marco that such a slight man could be so tough. Then Marco dislocated the man's hip joint as he leaped to jab his foot into Marco's larynx, and it was that second catch which brought out the great scream of agony. He was pounding the back of Chun-Jin's head into the floor and asking him a series of what he thought were deliberative questions, when the youngest squad car cop came into the room first and fast, hitting him behind the head with a sap, and the entire wonderful opportunity passed. At St. Luke's Hospital, Chun-Jin was adamant about two things. One, he was emphatic in his refusal to press charges against his former commanding officer, whom he had served long and intimately as orderly and interpreter, and who had most obviously mistaken him for an intruder in Mr. Shaw's apartment, knowing that Mr. Shaw had never employed a servant before. And two, it would be most necessary for the hospital staff to get him out of the place not later than noon on Monday, so he could shop for food, then cook the first meal on his job for Mr. Shaw, because if they did not get him out, he could lose his job, and it was the only job he wanted in the United States of America. He could not, of course, explain that he would be shot if he lost it. At the 24th Precinct House at 100th Street in Central Park West, after riding the uniformed, half-conscious Marco from Raymond's apartment in the squad car, they went through his effects, found his AGO card, made his branch, and called the Military Service Bureau downtown at the Police Academy, which maintained liaison between the New York Police and branches of the armed forces. The Bureau reached the duty officer at Army Intelligence, Washington, early in the evening. Marco was identified. The police were told with a very special sort of a voice, effectually a pleader's voice, that Marco was one of the best men they had, and that he had been having a very hard time. The voice explained, with great attention to their credulity, that Marco had picked up a sort of infection in his imagination while in the forward area in Korea, that he had run 2 hospital courses which had proved that he was as sane as anybody else, but, well, Marco had had a hard time, and anything the New York police could do that would tend to pull him together and send him on his way would be greatly appreciated by the U.S. Army. Under proper conditions, there is no more cooperative institution than the New York Police Department, but they had had so much experience with top-blowers they insisted that Marco leave the station house in some custody which could be certified as being equable. Marco's head still wasn't very clear. He had been slugged. He had been in a rough fight, and the adrenaline had turned to curds and whey in his veins. He was exhausted, and he hadn't been eating very much, but he knew enough to ask them to call Eldorado 92632 and ask for Miss Eugenie Rose Cheney. They left him in a cell while they made the call, and before the cell door had closed, he was asleep. Rosie got to the station house in 37 minutes. Unfortunately, just as she and the 2 detectives came along the cell block corridor, he had been sleeping just long enough to have reached the auditorium at Tung Hua, where Raymond was strangling Mavole with a silk scarf. As they stared into his cell, motionless for an instant, even the 2 cops were stricken with fright at the piteousness of his sounds and the imploring motions he succeeded in shaping with his hands. One detective got the door open. Eugenie Rose had gone chalk white and was gripping her whole lower lip in her teeth to keep from yelling. She slid into the cell ahead of the second cop and got on her knees beside Marco's bunk and shook him by the shoulders, talking steadily. Then, desperate to get him out of the trap he was in, she whacked him with the full strength of her splendid arm across the left cheek, and he came out of it, shaking. She held him in her arms. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said. "It's Rosie. It's all right now. The dream is over. It's Jenny," and stuff like that. She signed out for him at the desk as though he were a ripped purse some cannon had torn off her arm. He swayed slightly as he waited for her. She shook hands like a fight manager with the desk lieutenant, the 2 detectives, and a patrolman who happened to be passing through, and she told them if she could ever line up any hard-to-get theater seats for them, they were to call her at Job Justin's office, and she would handle it with joy. She took Marco out into the air of that freak night, a cold, cold night in mid-April, that was just one of the vagaries that made New York such an interesting place to die in. He was wearing a uniform overcoat and an overseas cap. He did not look so bad in the half-light. Everything was pressed. There was just a little blood on his right sleeve from Chun-Jin's face, from when he had overshot with the second right-hand punch. Eugenie Rose called a taxi as if it were her own hound dog. It came to heel with a hand signal. She put Marco in first, then she got in and closed the door. "Just drive through the park," she said to the driver, "and discard the conversation you've been hoarding up since the last fare." "I don't talk to passengers, lady," the driver said. "I hate people until they tip me, and then it's too late." "I think you should eat something," she said to Marco. "I love food," he answered. "I always have, but I can't swallow very well anymore." "We'll try anyway," she told him, and leaned forward to tell the driver to take them to the Absinthe House, a calorie and beverage bourse catering to some of the craftiest minds this side of the Owl and the Pussycat on West 48th. She leaned back on the seat and looped her arm through his. She was wearing a dark blue polo coat, some firm, dark skin, some white teeth, egg-sized dark eyes, and white hair. "It was very original of you to have the police department call so shyly and ask for our first date," she said softly. "They asked me who would be willing, and I thank you very much." She decided they needed more air and started to open all windows, telling the driver, "Sorry about all this air, but it's very important, take my word." "Listen, lady, when the meter is going, it's your cab already. Go ahead, take the doors off, it gets stuffy." Marco's teeth began to chatter. He tried to hold them clamped shut because he wanted her to feel efficient about opening the windows, but he sounded like a stage full of castanets. She closed the windows. "Let's pick up a can of soup and go to your place." "Sure." She gave the driver the changed destination. "You think they'll let me visit that fellow at St. Luke's tonight?" "Maybe first thing in the morning." "Would you come with me? It would keep me calm. I wouldn't want to hit him lying down like that." "Sure." "I have to find out where Raymond is." "The newspaper man you told me about?" "Why not call his newspaper?" "Yeah, you're right. Well, sure. So let's go to the Absinthe House if you'd rather do that. I'd feel better." "You know what I was doing when you had the police call me?" "I could guess if I wasn't so tired. I give up." "Well, after you dropped me off and I got upstairs, and before I took my coat off, I telephoned Lou Amjack, my fiancé." Marco came forward, alert and alarmed, "and he came over as soon as he could, which was instantly, and I told him I had just met you, and I gave him his ring back." She held up her naked, long fingers of the left hand and wriggled them. "I tried to convey my regrets for whatever pain I might be causing him. Then, just then, you had the police call me with the invitation to go into the tank at the 24th Precinct. I grabbed this coat, I kissed Lou on the cheek for the last time in our lives that I would ever kiss him, and I ran. At the station house they told me you had beaten up a very skinny little man, but that you were a solid type yourself, according to Washington. So I figured that if they were willing to go to the trouble to get a comment on you out of George Washington, you all must have had a really successful séance while you were in the pokey. And I must say it was real sweet of General Washington, with you only a major, and I hadn't even known you to admit. But if those policemen were the tiniest bit puzzled about you, they could have asked me. Oh, indeed, yes, my darling Ben. I would have told them." He glared at her fiercely and possessively, clapped an arm about her shoulders, and pulled her evocative mouth into his, while the driver, intent upon estimating within 2% the amount of the tip he would be paid, cleared one more stoplight just as it changed, heading east on 54th Street. Chapter 12. After days of wonderful, dreamless sleep upon the bed and breast of Miss Cheney, Marco called the Daily Press early Monday morning and learned that Raymond was in Washington. He reached Raymond at the press office in Washington a few minutes later. When he told Raymond he wanted very much to see him, Raymond invited him to dinner in New York that evening to help him rate a new cook. Then, remembering, babbled the news. "I just remembered. Your own orderly. Yeah, remember, your orderly in Korea, the little guy who was interpreter on the patrol, Chun-Jin. That's my new cook." "Huh? I mean, would you ever have been able to anticipate that?" Marco stated that he would not have been able to so anticipate, and inquired as to what time Raymond would arrive from Washington for the tasting. "Estimating the traveling time from Penn Station, and I believe you'll find I won't be more than 5 minutes off either way, I should arrive at the apartment at, say, 6:22. Even if you have to wait out on the corner to do it. I wonder if you'd mind calling Chun-Jin and telling him there'll be an extra place for dinner. You're probably dying to talk to him anyway. I know you old Army guys." "I'll take care of everything, Raymond," Marco said, and they both hung up. Raymond opened the door. "Chun-Jin isn't here," he said. "There's no dinner to offer you. Or you. But I did find a note. It's from him, and it says you beat him up and that he's now in St. Luke's Hospital." "One thing is for sure," Marco said. "There are plenty of sensational delicatessens in this neighborhood." "Why, that's a marvelous idea," Raymond said. He walked away from the door, allowing Marco to close it or not close it as he chose, and flipped open a telephone book across the square foyer. "I never seem to be able to think of it myself, and I love it. Pastrami and those pickles and that crazy rye bread with the aphrodisiacal seeds, and maybe a little marinated herring and some pot cheese with a little smoked salmon, and some of that indigestible sauerkraut they make out of electric bulb filaments, and some boiled beef." He began to dial. "On account of this, I am absolutely grateful to you for getting Chun-Jin out of the way." "Ah, that's all right," Marco said. "Glad to do it." "The elevator man was singing the blues, so I gave him 5. He sure can keep a secret. He just sang a second chorus for me, and I gave him 5. "What did you hit him for?" "He was determined to play peacemaker." "What did you whack Chun-Jin for?" "That's all part of what I came to tell you about." "Hello, Gitlitz. This is Shaw. Right, now hear this." Raymond ordered food for 10, as one does when one calls a delicatessen situated anywhere on Broadway in New York between 34th and 96th Streets, and told them where to send it. "I've been in the hospital off and on quite a bit over the past 2 years." "Hospital? What's the matter with you?" Raymond opened a can of beer. The room was fragrant with the smell of furniture polish from Chun-Jin's working weekend. Marco looked very thin, but no longer drawn. The Cheney method of soul massage had elements of greatness. He was dressed in civilian clothes, and his face had a distant, inactive look such as a man about to practice a banquet speech alone in a hotel room might have. Eugenie Rose had him coked to the gills on tranquilizers. The authority which had come with writing a successful column on national affairs had settled Raymond considerably, Marco thought, and had made him seem taller and broader. Raymond was 30 years old. He could not have moved up the scale to a better tailor because he had always used the best. He could not have worn whiter linen. His fingernails gleamed. His shoe tips glowed. His color shone. His teeth sparkled. The only fault with the lighting circuit was behind his eyes. Raymond may have believed that his eyes did light up, but unfortunately they could shine only within the extent of his art as a counterfeiter of emotions. Raymond did not feel emotion, and that could not be changed. When he was content, he would try to remember how other people had looked when they had manifested happiness or pleasure or satisfaction, and he would attempt to counterfeit the appearance. It was not effective. Raymond's ability to feel anything resembling either sympathy or empathy was minimal, and that was that. As Raymond listened to Marco's story with all of his attention, he could only understand that an all-out attack had been mounted against his friend, and that it had almost destroyed him. He supposed he would be expected to be upset as they went on to talk about that lousy medal, which had always been a lot of gas to him, tin soldier boy stuff. He had never asked for it, had never wanted it, and if there was some strange way that medal could keep his friend in the army and get him his health back, then they had to make sure that he found out exactly what that was, and, if necessary, to straighten this out and keep Ben safe, why, for Christ's sake, he'd even call in Johnny Iselin. He did not say any of this to Marco. He concentrated on trying to counterfeit some of the reactions he felt Marco must expect. "If what you've been dreaming actually happened, Ben," he said slowly, "then it happened to me, and it happened to everyone else on the patrol." "Such as Chun-Jin," Marco replied. "How about an investigation?" Raymond said. "That ought to do it." "Ought to do what?" "Uncover what happened that made you dream all that." "What kind of an investigation?" "Well, my mother can always get Johnny Iselin's committee in the Senate to—" "Johnny Iselin?" Marco was utterly horrified. "This is Army! What has that got to do with—" "All right, Raymond, I won't explain that part, but what happened is inside my head, and Melvin's head, and the best head doctors in this country haven't been able to shake it out, and don't have even the first suspicion of what could be causing it. What could a Senate committee do? And Iselin? Jesus, Raymond, let's make an agreement never to mention that son of a bitch ever again." "It was just an idea, to get started. I know Johnny is a swine better than you do." "Then why bring it up?" "Because we have to dump a thing like this on the specialists. What the hell, Ben? You said so yourself. The Army can't cope with this. What there has to be, if we're going to get anywhere with it, is a big, full-scale investigation, you know. Somebody has to make people talk." "Make who talk?" "Well, yeah?" "Well, the patrol. If my Medal of Honor is a fake, and believe me, I don't see how it could be anything else, because it doesn't figure that I'm going to stand up in front of a lot of bullets and be a big hero for that passel of slobs, then somebody has to remember, and somebody else has to make the rest of those guys remember that we've all been had. That's all. We've been had. If you can't stand the idea of Johnny Iselin, and I don't blame you, then I guess you'll just have to demand your own court-martial. How? What do you mean? What are you talking about? Marco looked as though he was just beginning to understand what Raymond was talking about, almost, but not quite. You have to charge yourself with falsifying your report that led to me getting the Medal of Honor, and you'll have to demand that the Army investigate whether or not that was done in collusion with the men of the patrol. That's all there is to it. They wouldn't be able to comprehend such a thing. A Medal of Honor? Why, a Medal of Honor is a sacred thing to the Army, Raymond. Jesus, the roof would come off the Pentagon. Sure. That's what I'm saying. Throw it wide open. If the Army can't understand, then what the hell? Believe me, Iselin will understand. He'll get you off the hook. No, never. It's got to be done the sensational way just to make sure it's done, and that the Army doesn't get to sit on another ridiculous mistake and let you stay sick like this. What would they care? You're expendable. But they make a hero out of me, so I'm not expendable. They couldn't take back a mistake as big as this one. Raymond, listen. If it wasn't for those Soviet generals and those Chinese in that dream, I'd be willing to be expendable. All right, that's your problem. But with the chance, just the sick chance, that there may be such an enormous security risk involved, I have to make them dig into this thing. You're right, Raymond, I have to. Why should I have gotten a Medal of Honor? I can't even remember being in the action. I remember the facts about the action, sure, but I don't remember the action. Talk about it. Keep talking about it, please. Well, look, let's reconstruct. We're on the patrol. You'll be at the center of that line, and I'll be off on their right flank, you know? It'll be dark. I'll yell out to you, Captain Marco, get me some light 20 yards ahead at 2 o'clock. And you'll yell back, you got it, kid. And very soon a flare will break open, and I'll pour on some enfilade fire on their column, and as everybody who reads comic books knows, I'm a very good shooter. I'll start to move in on them, and I'll take up one of their own heavy machine guns as I go, and I'll move 8 of their own grenades up ahead of me as I move along. Yeah, Marco said, but you don't remember doing all those things. That's what I'm trying to tell you, Raymond answered, irritably and impatiently. Every time I'm directed to think about the action, I always know what will happen exactly, but I never get to the place where it actually happens. Do you remember anything about a blackboard, Chinese instructors? No? Memory drills? Anything about a movie projection room and animated cartoons with a soundtrack in English and a lot of Chinese guys standing around? No. You must have gotten a better brainwashing than I did, or Melvin. Brainwashing? Raymond did not like that note. He could not abide the thought of anybody tampering with his person, so he rejected the entire business then and there. Others, told the same set of conjectures, might have been fired into action or challenged, but not Raymond. The disgust it made Raymond feel acted like a boat hook that pushed the solid shore away from him to allow him to drift away from it on the strong flowing current of self. It did not mean that he had instantly closed his mind to Marco's problem. He most earnestly wanted to be able to help Ben find relief, to help to change his friend's broken mechanism, to find him sleep and rest and health. But his own participation in what he had started out to make a flaming patriotic crusade, when he had first started to speak, had been muted by his fastidiousness. He shrank from what he could only consider the rancid vulgarity of brainwashing. It has to be a brainwash, Marco said intensely. In my case it slipped. In Melvin's case it slipped. It's the only possible explanation, Raymond, the only explanation. Why? Raymond answered coldly. Why would the communists want me to get a Medal of Honor? I don't know, but we have to find out. Marco stood up. Before I take this step, before I leave here, I'd like to hear you say that you understand that I'm going to explode this whole thing with a court-martial. Not to save myself from those dreams. Ah, for Christ's sake, Ben, whose idea was it? Who gives a goddamn about that? Let me finish. This is an official statement because, believe me, pal, I know. Once I get that court-martial started, my own court-martial, it can get pretty rough on both of us. He rolled his eyes toward the ceiling. My father. Well, it's a good thing my father is dead, with me starting out to make a public bum out of a Medal of Honor man. Shut up. But I have to do it. Security. What a lousy word. I look right into the horrible face of something that might kill my country, and the only word for the danger is a word that means the absolute opposite: security. Well, as you said, with stakes like that, I'm expendable. And so are you, Raymond, pal. So are you. Will you stop? Who thought it up? Me. Who practically made you agree to do it? Me. And you can shove that patriotic jive about saving our great country. I want to know why a bunch of filthy Soviet peasants and degraded Chinese coolies would dare to confer the Medal of Honor on me. Raymond, do me a favor. Tell me about the action again, please. What action? Come on, come on. You mean go on from where I was? Yeah. Well, you will throw up another flare, but you'll throw it about 20 yards ahead of me at maybe 12 o'clock, at maybe dead center of the line, because you figure I'll be moving across the terrain up that ridge, so... Man, oh man, this is something. What? Each time you talk about the action, you even tell it as though it hadn't happened yet. That's what I'm saying. That's the way I always think about it. I mean, when some horrible square comes out of nowhere at a banquet, the paper makes me go too, and he starts asking me about it. Come on, Ben. You made your point. Let's go meet your girl. Marco ran his fingers through his thick hair on both sides of his head. He put his elbows on his knees and covered his face with his hands. Raymond stared down at him almost tenderly. Don't be embarrassed if you feel like you're going to cry, Ben, Raymond said gently. Marco shook his head. Raymond opened another can of beer. I swear to sweet, sweet God, I think I'm going to be able to sleep, Marco said. I can feel it. There isn't anything about those crazy voices and those fast, blurring colors and the eyes of that terrible audience that frightens me anymore. He took his hands away from his face and reflexively reached over to take Raymond's can of beer out of his hand. Raymond reached down and opened another. Marco fell asleep, sitting up. Raymond stretched him out on the sofa, brought him a blanket, put out the lights, and went into his office to listen to the river wind and to read a slim book with the highly improbable title of Liquor, the Servant of Man. Marco was still asleep when Raymond left the apartment the next morning. Eugenie Rose Cheney called him soon after he reached his office. She asked if Marco had been sleeping quietly. Raymond said he had. She said, "Oh, Mr. Shaw, that's just wonderful," and hung up. Chapter 13. Raymond's mother called him from the Idlewild airport. She wanted him to have lunch with her. He tried to think quickly of somebody whom he could say he had to have lunch with, but she said he was not to stall her, that she was well aware that he disliked people too much to be stuck for an hour or more at a luncheon table with one, so he could damn well show up wherever they let ladies eat luncheon at the Plaza Hotel at 1 o'clock. He said he would be there. Beyond having acknowledged that his name was Raymond when she had first spoken, it was all he said to his mother. She was hard at work making a scene by bossing the maître d'hôtel, a table captain, and 2 waiters at a table that faced the park in the big corner room when he arrived at the plaza at 10 seconds before 1 o'clock. She motioned him to stand beside her chair until she finished her oration about exactly how they were to stuff the oysters into a carpet-bag steak, and that she would not tolerate more than 11 minutes of broiling on each side in a preheated grill at 400 degrees. The waiters bowed and left. Raymond's mother gave the maitre d' the full glare of her contempt for an instant, then spoke to Raymond. "I ask you to imagine a restaurant," she said, "which does not list Clos de l'Ambre or a Cuvée Dr. Peste." She waved the man away with bitterness. She permitted Raymond to kiss her on the right cheek, ever so lightly, then motioned him to his chair at the table for 4, not at her right or directly across from her, but at her left, which made it impossible for either of them to look out of the window at the park. "How have you been?" she asked. "Fine." "As am I, not that you asked. When I heard you ordering a steak stuffed with oysters, I had a clue. The steak will be mainly for you." "Sure." "Johnny is fine? You mean his physical health, I presume?" "I do, and everything else." "Is he in a jam?" "Of course not." "Then why are we here?" "Why are we here? Why are we having our annual meeting?" "I am your mother, which is a sufficient reason. Why did you ask if Johnny is in a jam?" "It occurred to me that you might have decided that you would have use for my column, which has so carefully disqualified itself from ever printing Johnny's name, despite the fact that he is an assassin, pure and simple. An assassin of character and the soul. He reeks of death, you know." Raymond exceeded his own gifts for being obnoxious and impossible when he was with his mother. His brushing gesture worked for him almost all the time, punctuating his haughtiness and scorn. His posture was as attenuated as liquid being drawn up through a drinking straw. His mother closed her eyes tightly as she answered him. "My dear boy, one more column of type in that welted world spelling out Johnny's name would not be much noticed." "I'll remember that." She opened her eyes. "What for?" Raymond, when he was with his mother, always felt a nagging fear that he was gaping at her beauty. As they spoke, whenever they met, his eyes searched each millimeter of her skin for a flaw, and weighed each of her gestures, anxious that he might discover some loss of grace, but to no avail. He was dismayed and gratified to fall back upon the mockery of her pretense, at disappointment, because there had been no Clos de l'Ambre or Cuvée Docteur Peste, which so failed to find harmony with the fact that Johnny Iselin drank bourbon with his meals. "Mother, in God's name, where did you ever hear of a thing like a carpet-bag steak? Johnny found it, didn't he?" Johnny had to find it, because in the world's literature of food there couldn't be a dish which expresses his vulgarity better than a thick, contemptuously expensive piece of meat, pregnant with viscous, slippery, sensual oysters. "Raymond, please, watch your language." She leered at him. "It's disgusting, and he's disgusting." "The reason I asked you to lunch today, Raymond," his mother said smoothly, "is that I have not actually been entirely well, and my doctor has suggested a trip to Europe this summer." "What's the matter with you?" He stretched out the diphthongs of the drawl until its sounds reverberated nasally into his soft palate, thinking, "Has there ever on God's earth been a liar like this woman? Does she at any square inch of her mountainous vanity conceive that I can be had through the delicate health appeal? Will she produce a forged electrocardiogram? Will a malpracticing doctor with an even gaze suddenly happen to discover that we are lunching here? She would never pull anything as crude as a feint, but she could play a great scene with any given kindly old physician who had been coached in his lines." "The doctor was a fool, of course," his mother said. "I went to the Lay Clinic and to the Mayo's for 2 separate checkups. I'm as sound as a Swiss franc." Raymond's resentment of her made him feel as though steel burrs were forming everywhere under his skin. "I'm going to lose this," he thought, "just as I lose them all with her. I'm being blindfolded as I sit here, and she will win if I cannot anticipate where she's leading me. Oh, what a woman! What a beauty she is, and what a dirty fighter! She is where the world should spit when they seek to spit upon Johnny Iselin. How can I forget that? How can I look into those serenely lovely eyes? How can I be so deeply thrilled by the carriage of her exquisitely wholesome body, and grow so faint at the set, the royal set of that beautiful head, and not remember, not always and always and always remember, that it encases a cesspool of betrayal, a poisoned well of love, and a city of deadly snakes? Why am I here? Why did I come here?" "I'm glad to hear it," he said, "but I distinctly remember you telling me that you had not actually been entirely well, just a few seconds ago. In fact, that was exactly the way you phrased it." She smiled at him with forbearance, showing rows of perfect white teeth.